The show is starting. the finest in underground television.
The listeners. "Is there anybody there?" said the traveler, knocking on the moonlit door, and his horse, in the silence, champed the grasses of the forest's ferny floor, and a bird flew up out of the turret above the traveler's head, and he smote upon the door again, a second time. "Is there anybody there?" he said. But no one descended to the traveler. No head from the leaf-fringed sill leaned over and looked into his gray eyes as he stood perplexed and still, but only a host of phantom listeners who dwelt in the lone house, then stood listening in the silence of the moonlight to that voice from the world of men, stood thronging the faint moonbeams on the dark stair that goes down to the empty hall, hearkening in an air stirred and shaken by the lonely traveler's call. And he felt in his heart their strangeness, their stillness answering his cry, while his horse moved, cropping the dark turf 'neath the dark and leafy sky. For he suddenly smote on the door again, even louder, and lifted his head. "Tell them I came, and no one answered, that I kept my word," he said. Never the least stir made the listeners, though every word he spake fell echoing through the shadowiness of the still house, from the one man left awake. Aye, they heard his foot upon the stirrup, and the sound of iron on stone, and how the silence surged softly backwards when the plunging hoofs were gone. Walter de la Mare.
Here before you is an opportunity to plumb the depths of the mysteries that confound and intrigue us. A chance to ask the big questions. Dr. Hal is not interested in questions of trivial matters or of facts that are easily gathered elsewhere. Dr. Hal seeks the questions that transcend fact. He stands before you ready to take questions that used to be brought to wise and aged sages on distant mountaintops. These questions can now be asked from the comfort of your living room. No Sherpas required. For you see, Dr. Hal is your personal sage, who, in exchange for a meager love offering, will answer and expound upon your question to produce an answer that will both entertain and inform. Should a question be an exceptionally good one, or if the love offering is especially, generous, Dr. Hal may dedicate a special recitation just for you. Submitting questions and love offerings is as simple as visiting our question portal at co-fi.com/AskDrHal, as shown on the screen. I, Pontius Pressure, will be monitoring this queue live during the show and will relay your questions to the good doctor on your behalf. Questions and pledges for love offerings can also be accepted through our Twitch chat interface live on the show. You may make a pledge, and our ever-present stage ghost, St. Joyce, will get you a link to our Ko-fi page for you to make the transaction at your leisure. Questions are read in random order, but if you want us to get yours sooner than later, drop us a line in Twitch chat. Questions may be submitted before and during the show, and every attempt is made to answer all questions that are received. So feel free to get your questions in early and often. Do not let this opportunity to consult a modern-day oracle, a seer for seers, a man steeped in the arts, sciences, and esoteric studies pass you by. Now, through the very internet itself, comes to you the one and only Dr. Hal Robins, now making house calls. Yeah. Hey, Dr. Hal, how are you?
Greetings and salutations. Oh, I'm doing well enough. I hope you are.
Yeah, I'm doing great. We've had, man, this has been a crazy busy month, but we're here. We've got a brand new show that we're very excited to be bringing you here tonight. And pardon me. And so far so good. I do have a couple of birthdays that I'd like to mention, if you'll indulge me. I have.
Oh, yes.
I have Reverend Ramulak. We'd like to say happy birthday to. We'd also like to say happy birthday to Ian Corrigan. And we would also like to say happy birthday to Ed Wood, who would have been 97 today. So you both share birthdays with Ed Wood. That is a distinguished and honorable thing. You're under the sign of Ed Wood.
Well, happy birthday.
Very good. In any event, we've got a couple of questions in the queue, but I did want to remind the audience that, well, it is the Ask Dr. Hal show. So without your questions, we need your asking in order for Dr. Hal to answer you, because that's what the show is all about. So I'm going to start with our first question tonight, Dr. Hal, and this is from Dr. Wolfgang Amadeus Gotterdamerung. And it is for $33.
Oh, the golden mean.
Quite.
Masonically appropriate question.
It's such a nice number. I love 33. But let me see. What can you tell us about troglodytes?
Troglodytes. That's an interesting question, but the question is what I can say about troglodytes. My information on these people is limited, but on the other hand, I am something of a student of prehistory, and not only that, but the lore of prehistory and the story, which is possibly something which could be called the Sunday supplement story, is that primitive peoples lived in caves. That is the meaning of the word troglodytes, or cave men. But in fact, although this is the cartoon version, there really aren't enough caves, enough good ones, to house even a small human population. Caves were used as special sacred places in which relics were gathered, including the skulls of the great cave bear, holy objects, since at the time the great cave bear might have been considered by an impartial observer to be the true dominant species on the earth. These bears lived long lives and sometimes died peacefully, surrounded by their loved ones in their remote lairs. And humans feared them. And of course, to kill one would be a tremendous achievement. But the cave bear itself stood for Thanatos in the prehistoric mythos. So I can tell you that troglodytes weren't really troglodytes. They weren't really cave dwellers, but they were cave visitors. And there they have left their art and their artifacts for us to find. Is that sufficient? $33 seems quite generous.
That's a nice round amount. Thank you.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Should I give something extra for it?
You know, it's a little early in the show, but it's never too early for a recitation. So yeah, I think that's perfect. I think that's perfectly appropriate.
Let me try then. Prospice. by Robert Browning. To fear death, to feel the fog in my throat, the wind in my face, when the snows begin and the blasts denote I am nearing the place, the power of the night, the press of the storm, the post of the foe, where he stands, the arch fear in a visible form. Still, the strong man must go. For the journey is done and the summit attained ere the barriers fall, though a battle's to fight ere the guerdon be gained, the reward of it all. I was ever a fighter, so one fight more, the best and the last. I would hate that death bandaged mine eyes and forbore and bade me creep past. No, let me taste the whole of it, fare like my peers, the heroes of old. Bear the brunt in a minute, pay glad life's arrears of pain, darkness, and cold. For sooner the worst turns the best to the brave, the black minutes at end, and the elements rage, the fiend voices that rave shall dwindle, shall blend, shall change, shall become first a light, then a peace out of pain, then thy breast, O soul of my soul, I shall clasp thee again, and with God be the rest. Thank you for your question.
It's beautiful, Dr. Hal. Let me see. I did want to mention we got a couple of non-questions, but Dr. Billy sent us $15, and he just said, just a respect offering. I think that's very sweet. Thank you, Dr. Billy.
Well, that is sweet. Of course, we deal with questions here. It's nice when they just send in the money, but they're supposed to be an interchange. So let's treat that $15 as a question. And the question is, wherefore is $15? $15 comes from our monetary system. Our monetary system is decimal based, and it was created by Thomas Jefferson. Yes, Jefferson created the dime, and he created the base 10 numerical system for our country, which is very easy to grasp intellectually, as it will be easy for me to grasp the $15 and put it away for a rainy day as a squirrel stores nuts. And thank you again.
Very good. Let me see.
What else do you have?
Well, we also have just a $3 from Reverend Fanboy. Not just a $3, but three wonderful dollars from
Yes.
Reverend Fanboy. But we just got the $3, not a question. So I have a question from my pool.
Well, I can deal briefly with the $3 by saying that 3 is the genesis of 33, the golden mean. There are 33 bricks in the pyramid on the dollar bill, 33 vertebrae in the human spine. The idea of the Masonic underpinning of the sign on the dollar bill is that with these bricks, we build that pyramid, at the top of which is the Os Dei, or the eye of God. That is to say, maybe God doesn't exist, but we can build him. We are perfectibilitarians and believe that by working toward perfection, we shall achieve it. And it all starts with something modest, like, say, $3. So thank you for that.
I have one more question here.
Yes.
Let me see. Actually, we had a few come in, so I'm going to select here. And
that's your job.
Appropriately.
Does everyone know that Pontius must go through the questions and study them and organize them, and then he decides in what order I am to be asked them? Just so everyone knows.
That's my job. This is from a Ko-fi supporter, no name attached, and it's a $5 love offering. And
How nice.
how much wood could Ed Wood if Ed Wood could wood?
Well, some think that Wood died discouraged because of his lack of wood. This is particularly after he transferred from low-budget monster movie making to pornography making. But these porno creations of Wood are clearly his, and some contain transitional elements of both erotic and horrific imagery. One of the most peculiar ones, but for the moment I can't seem to remember the name of it. The one with Criswell and strippers in a graveyard. Perhaps the name will come to me if my subconscious mind will release it. After that, he created such forgettable epics as 1 Million AC/DC, his pornographic caveman episode with unconvincing rubber dinosaurs and other things. Still, the enthusiasm of Ed Wood is what we should remember and respect, although he seems to fall into that rare category mentioned by Gertrude Stein, that the artist who is not very good. Indeed, the poor artist suffers just as much as the great artist does, and yet, in the end, he is only a poor artist. Well, we wish Ed Wood well on his birthday.
It turns out that question was from Reverend Ramulak. So that was an excellent birthday answer for Reverend.
Yes, well, we wish Ramulak also felicitations on his natal day.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Hal, I think it's time to go to our first feature for tonight, and it is our bee moment. Now, these aren't pressure bees this month. We found a video that we really liked, and we're gonna play it for everybody because it's chock full of information, just like we like. And I was when I was watching this video, I was learning things that I didn't know about apple trees and pollination and things like that. So I just figured rather than take little excerpts out of it, we would use it in its entirety. So I'd like to show that to the audience this week. So
continuing in our apiculture series.
On its way.
My name is Francis Ratnieks. I'm Professor of Apiculture at the University of Sussex and Head of the Laboratory of Apiculture and Social Insects. This project has been carried out on 2 apple farms in Kent, near Tunbridge Wells, in a village called Five Oak Green. It's called Helping Bees and Agricultural Pollination in Farmland. It is a project being carried out by a PhD student, Nick Balfour, under my supervision, and it is being funded by Waitrose. Pollination is the name given to the process in plant reproduction where pollen is transferred from the male part of a flower to the female part of the flower, when it then is able to fertilize, if you like, the egg, which results in a seed, and in the case of apples also a fruit. Now, apples are a plant which require cross-pollination. What that means is that the pollen produced on one plant cannot be used to pollinate the same plant. The pollen has to come from a different apple tree. Indeed, it has to come from a tree of a different variety or cultivar. In some farms, what they do is they plant crab apples along the rows. Now, these crab apple trees are not used for making a crop of apples. They're solely there to provide pollination. They have a lot of flowers on them. The bees pick up pollen, and then as they go to the next tree, they will be able to pollinate it. The honeybee is a pretty amazing animal, and one of the most amazing things it does is it communicates. And one of the ways they communicate is by making dances. This is known as the Waggle Dance. And a honeybee forager, which has found a good patch of flowers, when it gets back to the hive, it can waggle its body, making a dance, And by the speed of this dance and the angle of the dance, the bees nearby it can tell where the flowers are. And what we do is we have the beehive in a special glass-walled hive, so we can actually see the dances going on. We simply videotape the dances, play back the dances very slowly on a computer, and measure the speed of the dance and the angle of the dance. Now, when bees come back to the hive, many of them have got pollen on their legs and their pollen baskets, and we put a small mesh in front of the hive entrance, and it knocks off some of the pollen pellets of the incoming bees, and the pollen can then be analysed to determine, for example, what proportion is apple. We do other things as well. For example, walking up and down the rows of trees in bloom, we can count which insects are actually visiting the trees, pollinating. For example, what proportion are honeybees, what proportion are bumblebees, other types of bees and flies. So this tells us how important in general the honeybees are at providing pollination to the apple trees. What we're trying to do is to find some information which nobody's ever collected before, which is, where do the bees from hives in the apple farms actually go? Bees are decreasing in numbers, and the amount of crops requiring pollination is increasing. So we have to understand better and better how to use our bees to the main effect, or to the best effect, to give adequate pollination. Fruits, vegetables, all kinds of things we eat require bee pollination. It will take us a year or more to analyse our data fully and to write it all up. In particular, decoding the waggle dances is very time consuming. One thing that was easy to determine was the insects visiting apple flowers. Honeybees were in the majority at nearly 2/3, other bee species nearly 1/3, and the rest were flies at less than 1/10. We are looking forward to finding out what else our data have to tell us about apple pollination.
I didn't know anything about that part of pollination with apple trees. I had never realized that's why they planted crab apples.
Well, you know that the honey tastes like where the bees get their pollen.
I've caught my bees in numerous occasions in my compost pile, which has always given me a little concern. But I've talked to other apiarists, and they've assured me that it's just the bees looking for micronutrients and all that sort of thing. That
Absolutely.
they know what they're doing, apparently. So I'm always amazed that they can harvest poison ivy pollen, and it doesn't affect people who are sensitive to poison ivy.
Poison ivy honey, eh? Who knows? Maybe that's the solution to the world's woes. We'll find out.
I know some doorknobs I'd like to rub that on. But anyway, we have a couple more questions. We have one here. This is a $3 question from Rabbi Space Laser. And does Yeti blood flow through any animals beside humans? And do we know about the humans?
Well, as a subgenius, I must toe the official line, which is that true subgeniuses do keep the Yeti genetic admixture as part of their DNA structure. What to refer to blood makes one slightly uncomfortable, since this was used by the Nazis and other racists and is not considered scientific anymore, as the entire science of eugenics has been discarded for human purposes. But the Yeti is not capable of mating with an ordinary human. One must have Yeti sympathies, as it were, in a biological sense, in order for this admixture to generate a viable offspring. And yet, through a lengthy process of trial and error, according to the special and secret doctrines of the Church of the Subgenius, this actually did happen. The Yeti, perhaps in the most ancient times, are convergent with or congruent with the Nephilim, that strange race which had progeny by the daughters of men mentioned in the book of Genesis. They were larger and apparently more charismatic than the people who were around, and so this process was greatly resented. But it is difficult to pick out the truth from a tapestry of mythology and legend. Let us say that this is not something which I normally have to do, because as a subgenius, it is easy to point to the doctrine, which, if not strictly scientifically verifiable, still has much to tell us about our putative ancestry.
I have a question here. It's a $25 question.
Oh, great.
And this is from Dr. Penny.
Wonderful.
Some say that the movie industry is part of the conspiracy. As such, why do they make so many movies that display and encourage people to battle and win against them?
Well, if the movie industry were completely controlled by the conspiracy overtly, this would definitely be not what they would want to do, because the conspiracy would will that it be properly represented. To that, I have this answer, or series of answers. First of all, they do present the conspiracy as something desirable and viable. This is because that's where they get the most of their butts to put in seats to support the movie industry by ticket buying, or in our electronic age by streaming and other for pay services. Things which contradict the hidden or clandestine narrative which underlies society are generally capable of causing some dismay, some vague feeling that things are not right somewhere. Hence, the conspiracy tries to match this. But of course, part of what it tries to match is the rebellion against the way things are. That is always part of any particular group, perhaps even the nucleus of the group, enabling it to change and develop. The process of development and change is linked to growth and thus to life, while no development or change is linked to being motionless, or a pointer towards death and the inability to move, to think, or do anything. Let us remember that the conspiracy is not necessarily conscious, but it is subconscious. The conspiracy is composed of those who think alike, and it is from the Latin conspiro, meaning con, with, and spiro, meaning breathe. In other words, conspirators all breathe together. They think the same thoughts. This is the subgenius sense, because we do not believe that they all actively plot. But if something is useful, even if it contravenes their usual praxis, method of practice, the conspiracy will allow it, because money can be generated thereby. And also, one might cynically attest, because a fictitious rebellion satisfies the desire to kick against the traces without actually menacing the dominant structure, which becomes more dominant by seeming to allow it. What?
I have a question here from Mob Miati, and
Great.
this is a $21 question.
Splendid.
Do you think Barney Fife could beat Shethoff in a game of checkers?
That is interesting. Could Barney Fife, a fictional deputy in fictional Mayberry, USA, defeat Gonzotronics, fictional, let us hope, malign extraterrestrial being and god of the Lovecraftian pantheon? What type of intelligence does Yog have? Is it comparable with human intelligence? Gonzotronics does not even have a body that is consistent. Sometimes he or it appears as a congery of globes in a certain non-standard alien geometrical configuration. At other times, he has been described by dazed and frightened rustics as a squid spider sort of thing. However, there is no guarantee that this being could defeat a bumpkin sheriff's deputy playing checkers, because this is not what that being is designed to do or has designed itself to do. However, if there was an overwhelming necessity for it, this incredibly able and superior malign alien intelligence would be able to cross that barrier with little difficulty. Fortunately, our fates do not revolve around who wins or loses such a contest. Unfortunately, they do revolve around many other contests equally infamous.
Well, Dr. Hal, I think this is a good opportunity to do our next bit for everyone. This is our first musical interlude, and it's an interesting one. It's something a bit different, not that you would expect anything less. But I'm going to present that now, but I do want to remind the audience that we rely on your questions for the ask part of the show. So if you can
keep filling the hopper.
You can also put them in our chat area. You can put them in pledge forms. You can say, I've got a $3 question for Dr. Hal, and you can put your question there. And then our stage ghost, St. Joyce, will get you the link to Ko-fi so that you can take care of that at your leisure. But for now, let's move on to our first musical interlude.
Yes. Well, there you have it. Florganoleptic music, music by marijuana plants. And we can tell you that the selection we had was much longer, and we found that after 10 minutes, we were still listening to it in a kind of a trance. So we had to cut it down to 3 minutes. But yes, the question of plant consciousness has recently arisen or come back, like Roald Dahl's short story, The Sound Machine, which proved to be strangely prophetic when it was found that flowers do scream when the gardener snips them to put them into a bouquet. Special instruments have been able to tease that out. And so marijuana contributed to our musical themes, which tonight are based on drugs and alcohol.
You bet. I have a question here. It is a $10 love offering from Reverend Xenofact. And it is, Dr. Hal, please name one of your heroes or heroines and what we, your listeners, can learn from them.
My heroes or heroines? Well, there are a number, and they are all people one can learn from. Some persevered against much suppression. Going back to one who I highlighted some years ago as a proto-subgenius, let us choose Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, who gave himself the name Paracelsus. This early alchemist was quite aware that most of the science of his time was wrong, and he continued to state this, though it made him very unpopular. In fact, the word bombast comes from his name, since many considered his bromides simply rhetorical exercises without much validity. Unfortunately, he had to be dead for centuries before the validity of his teachings was recognized. Paracelsus influenced many people, including Victor Frankenstein, the builder of the Frankenstein monster, who created this being on exoteric scientific principles. Although he was criticized for that by Dr. Waldman, his former teacher. At any rate, Paracelsus influenced many others. Was he himself right while everyone was wrong? No, he often was wrong himself, but in a special creative way. And it is to Paracelsus that we owe the understanding of how the so-called four elements, actually different states of matter, are inhabited or may be inhabited by beings which live in them. That is to say, gnomes, undines, sylphs, and salamanders. The subject of perhaps future Ask Dr. Hal questions.
Perfect. Dr. Hal, I have a video question coming up for you, but I would like to... Yes, indeed. And this is going to be from Reverend Chuck Canuck. But I would like to remind our audience that they can send us video questions. So if you would like to ask the doctor a question in person in virtual space, just drop us a line at our show's email address, and we'll be happy to send you a link that you can upload that file to, and we will incorporate it into the show. So moving smartly forward.
And it breaks the monotony because we'll be looking at your face instead of ours.
Yeah.
So we do encourage it.
Yeah, yes, we do. And they're always fun to get. So, but here's Reverend Chuck Canuck.
Very well.
Hey, Dr. Howell. Oh. I'm wondering who you think is going to win the 2021 World Series, or if you even follow baseball at all.
Thank you, Reverend Chuck Canuck. Well, I am a resident of San Francisco. Thus, it behooves me to root for the San Francisco Giants. Yes, how about those Giants? And they did have a striking win the other day. On the other hand, more recently, they seem to have dropped an easy one. So like all teams, their fortune rises up and down and has to be averaged out on the great graph. But considering how much the San Francisco Giants or any professional sports players are paid, they certainly deserve to give their all for their sport. And let us hope they do. My prediction is certainly not based on any actuarial table or display of stats from the various players, only from the wish that the last team which can be legitimately associated with San Francisco will do good in this world. For those who haven't been following completely, the football team, the San Francisco 49ers, left San Francisco in a snit and are now essentially the Santa Clara 49ers.
Turncoats turned their back.
What was
on
that?
you. Those turncoats. They turned their back
yes.
on you.
Well, they're the head of their organization is a truculent billionaire who, is really the cause of this. They are simply the team who go along with what is said. But how about those Giants? They're certainly large. The fee, fi, fo, fum thing, who knows where that comes from. But many have been major players. Everyone knows about Goliath of Gath and his statistics, although David took him down. But then there was Galligantua, who had 2 heads, or Cormoran. The giant Gallipass used to kidnap travelers in the forest sauvage and hold them for ransom in his dungeon. But as Shakespeare said, it is splendid to have a giant's strength, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant.
Well, Hal, this seems like a good opportunity to let our question queue build up. Audience, I will remind you, we rely on your questions, so get them into us. We'll be happy to take them in any way you care to send them to us. So just get those questions in and we'll be happy to answer them. But let's go ahead and move to our first monster movie moment, Dr. Hal.
Oh, yeah.
And here it comes.
We now enter a primitive prehistoric world whose provenance is unknown to natural history. The inhabitants are often faced with the tremendous problem of hostile indigenous life forms, particularly the humans, the most dangerous of all life forms, especially when acting in coordination. Even most monsters of the era usually have to give way, but not in every case, however. The Erythrosuchus, a gigantic pleurotarsalian amphibious reptile whose kind actually predate the dinosaurs, is the antagonist here. Difficult to withstand. That one's really gonna hurt. Until recently, it was thought that Erythrosuchus had a taller skull like the Dimetrodon, but in fact, this flat skull is more correct. And so as he departs with his lawful prey, the bell tolls for primitive man in those times. Those were the days. Yes, ask not for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee.
That was yeah, that was a that, I've never seen that movie, but I am definitely going to sit down and watch it. It looks like a really cool little piece of animation.
In the midst of life, we are in death. But yes, the animation is of varied quality in the movie, and particularly at the beginning, it looks pretty crappy, but just stay with it and it gets a lot better.
We just visited Frank Frazetta's costume shop in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. It's owned by his family.
Until you told me, I didn't know that there was such an institution as Frank Frazetta's costume shop.
It is a gorgeous costume shop. If anybody's into that sort of thing, it is Hollywood level costumes, beautiful shop. So free plug there for our friends at Frazetta's costume shop.
Run by his wife? Is she the one who runs it?
I know it's his family that runs it. I don't know specifically. I know
maybe his wife also passed away. Frank Frazetta, after all, was around a long time. He was one of the EC artists, and of course he worked to produce that movie that we just saw a clip from, Fire and Ice.
Yeah, and if anybody remembers the Warren Publications Creepy Eerie Vampirella, he did many of the covers
for them.
Indeed. All right, well, Dr. Hal, I have another question here from Dr. Penny, and this is a $5 question. And it is, what is the economic forecast for the world in the immediate coming months?
In our opinion, Dr. Penny, the economic forecast remains steady in the next coming months, although it may receive a blow in December, which can destabilize it, since the inimical Republicans in Washington are trying to create chaos, even if it destabilizes the international economic scene and harms the good faith and credit of the United States. But this is what politics in the post-Newt Gingrich era has come to, and not just politics. The idea of having no collegiality with your confreres, but rather insulting them at every turn, comes from Newt Gingrich, who deserves to be given a special type of lasting punishment and consigned to a lower nether hell. Still, I can predict with some confidence that barring meteor strikes, earthquakes, or another plague, things will continue as they are maintained until at least the second necessity, arriving in December, for paying the debt raised by the previous administration, the Trump administration, which is considerable and will cause endless problems for the citizenry of the United States and to a certain degree for members of other nations if not addressed and if blocked by the malevolent head of the minority party in today's legislative landscape. Not usually the sort of question we get at the Ask Dr. Hal show, a political and economic question, but we try to hit them all and hope that we make them entertaining along the way, though that this is not always possible.
The views expressed on this program may not reflect those of management.
Well, I hope they reflect the management of our show. They probably
well, they do, but they'll, well, depending on who you consider the management, I guess. Yeah, well, actually looking around, yeah, pretty much. Well, yeah, okay, well, maybe they do. I don't know. I have a question here. It's a $5 question, but it's a really interesting question, and it's from Greasy Jim Johnson. And it's, what would you do if you found a dead body in a hotel room?
Well, Greasy Jim Johnson, I don't know the other circumstances, and they are extremely important when one discovers a body. of course, I'm assuming that one has nothing to do with the body. One does not know how it got there, but one has simply stumbled across it. The difficulty is that the police are always looking for someone to pin it on, and that often has been, in the past, the discoverer who must go to elaborate lengths to prove innocence in the question. However, it is best, all things being equal, to report it. I would report it to the hotel management rather than immediately call the police. This puts the onus on them to be the first responder, as it were, and perhaps they can be dealing with the immediate response of law enforcement more than some innocent traveler merely trying to get a good night's sleep after a day of doing whatever that has nothing to do with finding a stiff in one's lodging.
We have a $3 question from Rabbi Space Laser.
Good.
And oh yeah, Hal, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention earlier the question from Reverend Chuck Canuck was a $15 love offering. I did not mention
Oh,
I did not
well,
mention the love offering.
that was nice. I hope he was satisfied. I'm not a sports fanatic. It's difficult to predict the future of any team. Giants are doing pretty well. We can't guarantee always to provide a satisfactory answer. All we guarantee to provide is an answer, and whether or not it is satisfactory is definitely our responsibility.
I have a question here from Rabbi Space Laser. It's a $3
Yeah.
question, and is nudism worth the money saved on laundry?
The difficulty is the nudist cannot always be naked because it is necessary to engage with the larger society. The nudist must be, for the most part, within an enclave of like-minded individuals, a secluded enclave, such as the one where X Day was held this year at the land of Id in Florida, where we went to Xanthia Octoshroom's nudist camp. And it was quite memorable, certainly. But only there can one have the freedom of discarding clothes if one wishes. That is to say, clothes optional. Militant nudists might insist on clothes never, which would be uncomfortable, since the modern human does not have a hairy coat since the Ice Age and might often be chilled or otherwise disconcerted by such weather conditions as rain and a strong cold wind. Now, I have a good friend who always prefers to be naked, and I have argued with her about it, or at least put in my opinion that although it's enjoyable to be naked, then there's another type of enjoyment which comes from putting your clothes back on. But she denies that this second kind exists, at least for her. Usually, whenever it's possible, her clothes hit the floor. However, there is an entire spectrum of opinions on the topic. Some consider nudism to be being partially dressed, but surely it must be to be completely naked, to be a true nudist. One would think so. Should I say nudism is in the eye of the beholder? It certainly may be. People are not allowed on airplanes for wearing costumes which are considered too revealing, although recently a woman in a bikini made a transcontinental flight without being harassed. I don't know how she got away with it. Let's see, am I coming anywhere near to an answer. Could you remind me what the specific aspect of the question was? Is nudism
worth the money saved on laundry?
Well, I'm afraid I would have to say that it's certainly worth that if you want to be that way. But since you will have to have some clothing around to intersect with the rest of society, you will also have to do laundry, but you won't have to do as much. How much does it cost to go to a secluded nudist resort? Probably more than it costs to drop quarters in the washing machine, if indeed you do that anymore. I think people probably use their phones to activate the washing machine. How is that?
I thought it was good.
All right.
Although I haven't seen any washing machines that are activatable by my telephone yet. Do you have that on the West Coast?
We have it in this building. On the lower floor, there are 2 washing machines, but you have to have a cell phone and hold it up and do something with it. I never
Wow.
use them myself.
What
People are doing everything which phases out quarters and dimes and things like that, but they are still useful in some vending machines and in most laundromats.
What are we ever going to do with the people who just don't use those things?
Well, they'll be kicked to the curb, as it seems that they are being now.
They'll need to begin to practice nudism.
Well, yes, you can't carry your phone around if you are truly naked.
Well, you can develop certain muscles to kind of jam, put it in there. With that being said, we're going to now phase into the alcohol part of our program with our
Very
next
good.
musical interlude. So
Yes, we had the marijuana part, and now for you liquor fanciers, the alcohol part.
but it's not too late to get your questions in, so get them into the queue and we'll get them onto the show. Here comes our musical interlude.
Here it comes to save the day.
And there you have it, The Alcoholic by Fat.
That was a heck of a thing.
Yes.
I have to say, I get to listen to things when we put the show together about 20 times before everything's said and done. And every time that song plays, I'm sitting here doing, that's a great song. I have a question here from Reverend Newman. It is a $15 love offering.
Very good.
What is your criteria for picking a pumpkin for whatever purpose you desire at a pumpkin patch?
Well, thank you for the question. Let me be slightly pedantic here, as is my wont, and say that criterion is the word that you need, not criteria. Criteria is a plural. So you should say, what are your criteria? That is, if you think I have more than one. It could be that simply the shape, the size, and the expressed personality of a pumpkin would be enough to recommend for me to take it home if I needed to carve a jack-o'-lantern face on it. You know, this is one of the things that I can do well, and so I am always happy to do it, although we don't put one out here since we are shunned by the neighbors and never visited at trick-or-treating time. But of course, one needs a large round gourd with a good stem on it, a good length of stem. This becomes the handle when you remove the lid of your hollowed out jack-o'-lantern. If only the innards of the gourd could be used in culinary practices, this would certainly be efficient. But alas, the part that you leave behind is the part that you would make a pumpkin pie, a pumpkin spiced latte, or pumpkin anything out of, pumpkin ice cream. The nose hole and eye sockets and mouth hole are generally not enough for a successful creation of these edibles. Well, what one looks for is what one looks for in selecting anything alive: vigor, size, and lack of disease or decay. You don't want a pumpkin that seems to have a leering, leprous countenance, one that already seems to be along the path to rotting and caving in. Let nature take its course, but for the time being, as with a bouquet of flowers, you take them as most nearly alive they recently seemed to be.
We have a question here from Dr. Wolfgang Amadeus Gotterdammerung, and it is a $3 love offering. And the question is, do you have a favorite comic book and comic book character of any kind? Superhero, horror, underground, Harvey, etc.
Well, Harvey, I was never fond of their character lineup. I like the setup of some of their comics. The Devil Lil Hut stuff was interesting because he was often visited by his kin, other devils who were not so cute and baby proportioned. Even Satan himself appears. In fact, there is a Lil Hut stuff comic where Adolf Hitler makes an appearance. He and his bullies want to cut down the apple trees in the magic forest. Well, Lil Hut stuff doesn't permit that. But what a bizarre comic it is, with Hitler and his goons hiling each other in the magical forest. But to get away from Harvey entirely, EC Comics had great stories, but their only continuing characters were the so-called Ghoul Lunatics, the EC horror hosts, the old witch, the vault keeper, and the crypt keeper. But although I'm quite fond of those characters, and there was another one, a beautiful silent woman who never spoke, Drusilla, I like her pretty much. But My favorite ongoing series comic character is Hergé's Tintin, a wonderful character whose adventures are even literary in nature, in that there is progress, not just an apparent continuity to generate a comic book entertainment. There is a direction that Tintin and his friends, Captain Haddock and so forth, take throughout the great series produced by this great Belgian cartoonist. And the books are available in English translations, although one should be careful about which translation one selects. Even today in France, Tintin is easily recognizable. Until one encounters the actual books, I would not recommend introducing the character by the Steven Spielberg movie, which, like many Spielbergian things, attempts to suck the life out of something which it doesn't really understand.
Well, Dr. Hal, I'm going to give our queue a chance to fill up a little bit, but
That is for the best.
I think now would be a good time, though, to show our second monster movie moment.
Very good. There's always a second monster after you've gotten rid of the first monster. And here it comes. It's a Lulu. Equinox, the occult barrier between good and evil. What is this twilight world? Just to confront it admits evil, and therefore it is not good. For example, here is a materialized monster whose service is to unspeakable entity. They want the key back. There is a belief among some occultists that to take a picture with the camera is to steal and imprison the soul of the person being photographed.
Help! Save me! Help me! Help me! Help!
It's unfortunate that this creature should choose to attack the famous writer Fritz Leiber, who used to compose stories for Weird Tales magazine and its editor Farnsworth Wright.
Throw rocks! Get his attention!
Yes, throwing rocks will get his attention. It always gets my attention. Back on your feet. Keep that rock festival coming. No, I'll go get the girls and you throw rocks. But what good does throwing rocks do in the end? Or any human intention? If you just give it back the copy Chronomicon there, it would leave you alone. Time to carve a stick to poke a monster with. After about 10 minutes of pocket knife work, the monster poker is ready, a surprisingly effective weapon.
Try to get his attention.
How to get his attention again, I suppose by throwing more rocks, or simply by exhibiting the preppy look of white Levi's and sweater vest. Clumsy footwork afoot. Never mind that clown, get the book. The book is the key. And with this besom of branches, the creature will pull the book toward it. An intelligent, reasoning being. And it's got the book. But unfortunately, it also got a monster stick to the vitals. Like giant spiders, these monsters are particularly vulnerable to being punctured. The hydraulic pressure inside them is lessened and they perish. It was only trying to do the will of its unseen master. But then, aren't we all? That's one extra-dimensional monster the fewer. Scientific, educational. Well, let's go on.
You know, another one. I watched that thing 15 times, and for being a B movie, I just never got tired of watching that scene. It was just, it's
Well, maybe one gets a sense somehow of the many hundred hours that it takes to produce such a sequence.
Well, if you watch that movie and you realize how much heart went into it, it all of a sudden has a different meaning. It's a really interesting movie. A lot of attention to detail went into it.
More of it on later episodes of this show.
Absolutely. Well, I have a question here from a Reverend Pushmeat Porkins. What kind of noises did dinosaurs make?
Is this a sponsored question?
Oh, I'm sorry, Hal. It's a $6 question. $6 love offer.
All right. That's very reasonable. That's very handsome. Well, this is a question which has perplexed scientists and scholars and others for some time. When they made the 1933 King Kong, producer Marion C. Cooper sent soundman Murray Spivak to the American Museum of Natural History to ask the specialists there, what kind of noises did dinosaurs make? He received the discouraging answer that they probably didn't make any, didn't have voice boxes, and at the best could produce a breathy hiss. In fact, in that movie, you hear all sorts of sounds being made. The Brontosaurus coming out of the swamp makes croaking sounds. The Tyrannosaurus, or whatever it is, the Allosaurus, as it was called by Cooper, makes a distinctive cry. So does the Stegosaurus and other creatures. The Plesiosaurus coming out of the dark pool makes a hiss. One would assume that a hiss can always be made. It is a sound made by the expulsion of breath. But now we know almost for sure that some dinosaurs did make specific noises. Since they made them, it is plain that they could also hear them. Also, dinosaurs have a tympanic opening, which serves them as an external ear. And when they have an elaborate carapace, such as the squamoso-parietal frill on ceratopsians, which takes a deep indentation before the jugal bone, in that indentation, you see the tympanic opening. So these things could hear too. I would say that it's a good bet that anything which needs to listen to noise is also capable of making noise for signaling and identification purposes, also for challenging others. So then what kind of sounds would they make? Let's go forward and say loud sounds, or at least a low subsonic sound that can be apprehended by others. The Ornithischians had elaborate crested versions which may have had resonating chambers within their crests, which could have been heard over many miles of prehistoric landscape. Let's not discount hisses, but roars are also likely. It is somewhat doubtful that they would spend all their time roaring the way they do in dinosaur movies, because this is an expenditure of breath and energy best devoted to other purposes.
Dr. Hal, I have a $6 question from Reverend Guimo. And
All right.
it is, people weigh less on the moon. So do planets weigh less on the moon as well?
Well, planets don't get to the lunar surface, but they affect the moon as the moon affects its orbital body, the Earth, causing tides. If it were not for the moon, we probably wouldn't be here, and most life on Earth would be more or less the type that evolves in a giant stinking swamp where the water is not moved into waves and eddies by gravitational attraction. The moon, in fact, in its largeness and uniqueness in orbital function, is probably one of the things that we should look for in a planet which is supposed to support life, at least life all our own. On the moon, you weigh about 1/6 of your Earth weight. When you jump up in the air, you jump 6 times higher. When you return to the ground, the lunar regolith, you fall 6 times slower. So if you keep your wits about you, you can land without much difficulty. Moreover, as H.G. Wells pointed out, you are denser and heavier than anything that the moon generates. So you have the power to destroy lunar objects and inhabitants, if they should encounter you, with a single punch, which should cause them to splatter and explode, since they are 6 times less strong in their integral construction than you lumbering, muscular Earth creature. If a planet could touch the moon, but it couldn't because the greater body always absorbs the lesser, and if a planet were subject to the lunar gravitational pull, it would certainly weigh less, but this weight cannot be calculated because this would be upset in a microsecond. All the planets of our system are falling toward the sun, and the moon is constantly falling toward the Earth. But fortunately for the rest of the solar system and for us, when the moon reaches where we were, we are there no longer. Our planet has moved on, following the sun, taking its family of planets and moons with it. So when we reach the part which we were falling toward, the sun itself has conveniently scooted out of the way.
Dr. Hal, I will mention, I'm not sure if I mentioned earlier in the show, but a Reverend Fanboy sent $3 in with a simple "Have a good day, Dr. Hal."
Well, we appreciate that, Reverend Fanboy. I hope you're watching and getting some equity on your donation.
Worth every penny. You know, I thought that last question was going to be the last question, but I did shake the jar, and I came up with one more for you, Dr. Hal, to close the show on. This is from T.T. Olivetti, and it's, do fortune cookie predictions have a time limit?
Well, I like to assume that fortune cookie predictions start being relevant the moment you take them out of the fortune cookie. One must be in a mind to accept them. And in order to show acceptance, one must take a bite of the fortune cookie. Having eaten a little bit of the cookie, you are now in line to receive the fortune. These fortunes come in a number of varieties. Some are aphoristic. Rather than describe your future, they simply contain some adage, some saying, but that saying can be applied to your future if you think about it. Others are monitory or admonitory. They can contain a saying which has critical elements, and from that it can be extrapolated that you are doing something wrong which needs to be corrected. But the remainder are those which predict generally good things. This is a matter of good business, of course. You can't have a bummer in every fortune cookie and expect people to leave the restaurant without at least some frisson of a disagreeable situation. But on the other hand, consider where it comes from. You are asking something, an oracle, about the future. It didn't apply until you opened it and took that bite of the fortune cookie. Now it does, and the meter is running. The clock is ticking for this fortune traveling through the strange, phenomenal universe with all its hidden and unseen, as well as overt and seen aspects, to become true, to enact itself, to fulfill itself. It would be foolish not to take in this particular datum and to watch to see if anything which seems possibly inimical can be avoided or indeed turned to your advantage. The idea here is that we are often given the answers but ignore them. And so one should always look for the answer, and if one finds it, not ignore it, at least pay some attention to it. Our show is, in a sense, based upon this principle.
Excellent. Well, remember that jar I mentioned? I shook it again.
Yeah.
And another question fell out. And it's a $6 question from an anonymous Ko-fi supporter. But I like this question. What is the value of travel?
Yeah, well, that's a good one. Of course, the old saw is that travel broadens one. When one leaves one's particular habitation and goes out into the street, one is likely to encounter something in progress which otherwise would never touch you. And if you leave your rural village for a more exciting and happening urban environment, you may get involved in other and greater things still. In a sense, we are all in some mud-daubed peasant village and think that everything there is what should be, and every standard found there should be universally applied. A trip outside its environs shows the fallacy of this thought, that there are always greater worlds and perhaps better worlds. A knowledge of these things brought back to one's own demesne can help one there, since now you will possess an advantage that the other inhabitants of the peasant village will not have. To extend this further, one may travel in time as well as in space. And by seeing what people at other times have said about something by looking at the great history of the past as expressed in the noosphere, the world of created things and writings, one achieves a more cosmopolitan view, and one does not take the givens of your own little space as being eternal, omnipresent, and unchangeable. That is a beginning of understanding. More importantly, it is a continuation of the process of learning and development. To continually develop is to go forward and to be in the process of growth, while, as I said earlier, not to do so is simply a premature expression of negation and ultimately death.
Well, Dr. Hal, I must say I love the tip jar tonight. I don't know what's going on, but I shook it again, and we got another love offering that fell out of it. It's just a cornucopia of love offerings this evening.
As it should be.
But
What did you find?
this is a $6 love offering. It is from
Yes.
Dr. Wolfgang Amadeus Gotterdammerung. And
Yes.
did the Chinese water torture actually work?
Well, that's a good question. One would have to know the procedure in every case, which we don't. But the idea is that the slow accretion of a slight irritation ultimately drives the human crazy. But this depends on the human in question. And so with some, it would be successful. With others, it would be successful after a longer interval of time. And some would never succumb to it because they had made that mental judgment. That is the flaw in the incremental method. While in the West, torture machinery was developed, which could really not be ignored, as the Chinese water torture could be for a while. Ultimately, as drops of water falling on a stone wear it away, this would happen to a human head, but the answer would hardly be then forthcoming. The only purpose of doing it would be to produce an unpleasant predicament for one's enemy, which unfortunately is a constant human motivator, both in ancient China and in our contemporary world.
Well, apparently when I said it was a cornucopia of love offerings, I collapsed the reality tunnel and the questions seem to have ceased. No more
Well,
shaking.
that is to be expected, I suppose.
Shaking is no longer an effective method.
Well, we thank everyone who contributed for how interesting the questions were tonight.
Excellent show. Thank you, everyone. Well, with that, Hal,
Yes.
we have this moment to go ahead and have you give a final recitation for us. I'm sure
And so
you have.
I will.
I'm sure you have something in mind for the season.
Yes, I do. Well, it is somewhat seasonal. And that will be the poem Fastitokalon. Fastitokalon is a marine monster, one that has been seen in all the oceans of the world, but never actually cataloged by science. It comes in the form of an immense turtle, and so large is it that unfortunate travelers have sometimes landed on its back, just seeking respite from being on a tossing ship and the uncomfortable feelings that one comes with that. However, one should never walk on this giant turtle's back. In the Middle Ages, the turtle was thought to be a symbol of Satan, who lures the unwary to their doom. Fastitokulon. Look, there is Fastitokulon, an island safe to land upon, although 'tis rather bare. Come, leave the sea, and let us run, or dance, or lie down in the sun. See, gulls are sitting there. Beware, gulls do not sink. There they may sit, or strut, or prink. Their purpose is to tip the wink, if anyone should dare upon that isle to settle, if only for a while, to get relief from sickness or the wet, or maybe boil a kettle. Ah, foolish folk who land on him, and little fires proceed to trim, and hope perhaps for tea. It may be that his shell is thick. He seems asleep, but he is quick, and floats now in the sea with guile. And when he feels the sudden heat, or faintly hears their tapping feet, with smile he dives, and swiftly turning upside down, he tips 'em off, and deep they drown, and lose their silly lives to their surprise. Be wise. There are many monsters in the sea, but none so perilous as he, old horny Fastitokulon, whose mighty kindred all are gone, the last of the great turtlefish. So if to live is what you wish, take this advice. Pay heed to sailors' ancient lore. Set foot on no uncharted shore, or better still, your days in mirth, at peace on the green earth fulfill. J.R.R. Tolkien.
That's so nice. Beautiful, Hal. Thank you. Well, with that, I guess it's time to say goodnight, and we will see everyone again with our next live show on March the 14th.
You must mean November 14th.
November 14th. I just heard
Yes,
St.
the
Joyce.
march of time will carry us forward to November.
I just showed my subgenius colors. I heard Joyce on the other side of the room go, "Oh, what are you talking about?" Yes, November 14th. We already have the show. We're already rolling that boulder up the hill for you as we speak. So we'll see you on
and you'll like it too.
And we'll see you on March the 14th too.
So visit us now in the post-show chat room.
Yes, indeed. And with that, good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Good night.